Done. Got you. Drinking.
I'll drink some more.
Thank you, everyone that's here. I don't know who's here, but thank you for being here. This is the first serious thing I've ever done on this channel, so excuse me if it's kind of rough. Normally it's all just improv stuff, but Cameron, if you want to introduce yourself, I'm sure you could do a better job than what I would do.
Well, I'm sure you do a great job, but I will introduce myself. I'm Kamran Pasha. I'm a screenwriter and novelist, and I think we're on today to talk about a show that I was a co-producer on, Sleeper Cell, which was on Showtime back in 2006 to 2007, a couple of seasons. We got a bunch of award nominations and had a very interesting impact on Hollywood, which I hope to be able to talk about.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I remember watching the first season when I was in Iraq. I got a bootleg, but that's how we got everything. And I just remember, loving the show, and it felt so different than what else was out there. Cause at that time was like 24. I looked up to see what was like around. Cause this was 2005, right?
It was on the air. Yeah. End of 2005 and then 2006. Yeah. So yeah, it played as 2 back-to-back miniseries each season. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's such a interesting time for this show to come out with, not demonizing Islam as a whole, but having just a very deep and multifaceted look at Islam and the war on terror and everything that just brings all that together. But how did you get involved with it?
Well, it was a unique show for those of you in the audience that didn't see it. I hope you will see it afterwards. It's available on Amazon, even though I've got a lot of issues with Amazon, but that's what we've got nowadays.
Hulu as well.
But
it's on Hulu.
It's on Hulu as well, so go to Hulu. But yeah, the show was unique and different because it was actually a Muslim hero. The actual lead character was an African-American Muslim FBI agent who infiltrates Al-Qaeda and defeats a terrorist plot, sort of the equivalent of 911. He prevents it from happening. And so you get a devout, practicing Muslim as the hero of the show, and not just sort of the side character, but at the central point of view. And it's his POV into the war on terror and these people that are corrupting his religion and doing things in his religion's name, right? So that was unique and had never been done before and really hasn't been done again. We can talk about why that is the case.
Yeah. Now that you said that, I'm like, oh no, I don't think I've seen. Yeah, that is very interesting. How did you get involved with the show?
Well, I didn't create the show. It was created by 2 brilliant screenwriters, Ethan Reef and Cyrus Voris. They were very successful movie screenwriters, and they had created, I think, another television series on Fox before. And so they had come up with this idea. They shared with me that what had inspired them was that right after September 11th had happened, if you remember, there was sort of this national fundraiser on television, right, to raise money for the victims and for the first responders, right? And Muhammad Ali came on stage at the time, and on stage on national television, he said, "Look, you all know me. This isn't my religion, what just happened here. So I want you to understand that." And when he said that, people, it actually hit people a lot because they hadn't really thought the same thing, right? Because everybody loved Muhammad Ali. And at the same time, they would be like, yeah, but I don't like Muslims and they're responsible for this attack, right? And so for him to say that on national television really shook up a lot of people. And that's what inspired the creators of the show, at least as they told me, to come up with this idea. And at the time, there were other shows like 24 that sort of had your standard comic book approach of the Muslim villain Jack Bauer was defeating and all of that. And so they sold it to Showtime, and they started looking for a writing staff for the series. Showtime filmed the pilot, greenlit the show, and I was hired onto the show as a writer. And in the second season, I was officially a co-producer. And I would like to believe that one of the major reasons I was hired, aside from being a good writer, was that I actually, I'm one of the very few practicing Muslims in Hollywood, even fewer than back in 2005, right? 15 years later now. But I could bring an authentic perspective to the character, because there's only so much you can, if you're not a member of any religion, there's only so much you can figure out reading The Complete Idiot's Guide to XYZ, right? I'm not a member of the Mormon tradition. And for me to do a show about Mormonism, I would like to believe that I'd bring somebody from the Latter-day Saints into the show because no matter how much I read about it, it's not going to be the same as someone who actually practices and believes the faith, right? And so they very graciously brought me on. And I wrote several of the episodes, both seasons, and they very much let me be a voice in the room. And it could be a challenging show at times because we're dealing with very emotional issues about terror and about violence and about religious fanaticism. And it would push each other's buttons in the room, right? The show pushed people's buttons as they watched it, right? And it was my job, if anyone in the writer's room said or presented a point of view that I didn't think was authentic to the characters, even the villains. Like if I didn't think that's actually how the Muslim terrorists thought, I'd have to challenge it, right? And that could get very uncomfortable at times. But we got through it, and we made a very good show.
That's awesome, dude. And I get what you mean by like having to be in it to really get it, because like for me, when I watch anything about the military or police, because I was a cop after I was out of the army, you pick up on little things that they just don't get.
Yeah.
In like a lot of times in my life, like I've been at a bar and you hear a guy gets bragging about his time in the military and he was Delta Force and all this, and just immediately there's just certain things that people say that don't fit. And if you're from that world and you know that world, you catch up on it so much quicker than if you weren't. And that's why I really appreciate how real the show felt. And I gotta say, your episode number 4,
probably the scholar episode. Yeah, that's the one I was first credited on. Yeah,
the best one.
Well,
out of both seasons. I agree. I actually was reading.
It was submitted
reviews.
for an Emmy. We didn't win the Emmy with it, but Showtime loved it enough that they submitted that as the episode for best writing for the show. So I
should have. Yeah. I read a review. It was a negative review, but I wanted to highlight this one part.
Yeah.
Where they say that all right, so demonstrates the identity crisis at the heart of the series. It makes a point about true Islam versus the one claimed by extremists, but doesn't force Darwin to bring his faith head on against Al-Farouk's perverted version until the 4th episode. And it is in this 4th hour that the story's grip at last takes hold. And I was like, yes, yeah, I love. And Christian by far was my favorite character.
Sure. And he's a character, I'll tell your audience, he's a character that we got a lot of criticisms for, because like, oh, that's not realistic. But he's a character who was a white Frenchman who had converted to this radical Islam and had been pulled into this Al-Qaeda unit. And he was sort of this complicated character who had once been a right-wing extremist. He had been a skinhead, and then he just moved from one kind of extremism to another. And people says, oh, look, there's an example of you essentially whitewashing all these terrorists, right? It's like, no, it's certainly in the 2000s when this show was being done, all the characters are based on historical figures. There was an actual French Al-Qaeda guy who was arrested, around the same time. The character was in many ways modeled after him. He was the sort of Casanova of the jihad, right? He had all these women who were holding him up in safe houses because he was this charming French dude, and he was also this Al-Qaeda terrorist. And so all these characters are based on real people, because at that time Al-Qaeda was evolving. After the September 11th attacks, somebody that looks like me was getting hassled at the airport, right? We're getting extra scrutiny, extra precautions. And so somebody like me isn't useful in doing a covert terror attack. Someone like a white French dude who you would never expect is very useful. And that's how Al-Qaeda had already evolved. Within 3 years of the September 11th attacks, they were already doing that.
I love the way you approached them as well with the with him questioning. When him and the scholar were speaking in the mosque, and he was quoting the Quran, and then the scholar was like, no, but you forgot the first part.
Yeah.
I think that it really highlighted how religion is never really the problem. It's the people that use religion for their own agenda.
Sure, and how they interpret it and how they selectively interpret things. That scene that you're talking about, that episode that Matt is referring to, was the 4th episode of the first season. It's called Scholar, and the entire episode is essentially a debate, a religious debate between one of the terrorists, this French terrorist in particular, versus a Muslim imam who's essentially deprogramming these terrorists. And that character was also based on a real life Yemeni Islamic scholar who was used by the Yemeni government to deprogram. He would go into prisons where Al-Qaeda guys were being held and would actually deprogram them and say, man, this actually isn't Islam. Let's go over the Quran together. And they'd be like, what? That's not what I was told, right? And so that whole episode was based on that, and then it had sort of a tragic ending of where the relationship goes. But yeah, that the debate sequences, I actually wrote that entire episode in 24 hours. I stayed up all night and wrote the entire episode in 24 hours. And it was, we made some minor adjustments. That's pretty much what we filmed. And all the religious debates, the verses of the Quran, all of these things. I mean, I was writing those at 4 a.m. in the morning because I've been thinking about that all my life. Like all my life, people have said to me, your religion sucks. your Quran says this. People say that to me on Twitter today. People say that to me in
Right.
the comments on some of the videos that when I'm on doing live streams, people will come up and say your religion sucks in the comments, right? And so I'm used to this, and so I always have the response. It's like, you actually haven't read the Quran. You've read this verse, we haven't read this other verse which explains this verse and all that. And so I cranked all that out, and that's what I think made that episode so authentic, because it was pouring out of my heart, something I've been thinking about all my life, that people have been telling me my religion sucks my whole life. I'm like, but you actually haven't read the book. You've read what you think is the part of the book, or you've read a bad translation of it, or you've read an extremist, the interesting thing is, if you read the Al-Qaeda scholars, whatever they have justifying their actions, they don't actually ever base it on Islam. They're always using this as Marxist sociological theory of fighting the oppressor and fighting imperialism, but they don't actually bother, because they know Islamic literature isn't going to support this material, right? And so they rarely reference it. Bin Laden and Zawahiri and all those guys rarely actually reference the Quran, because someone would point, hey, that's not what the book actually says. So they would talk in terms of, well, you're the oppressive, imperialist forces, and it sounded like Mao Zedong is talking, right? We got to stand up against the imperialist forces of capitalism, and you're like, okay, I don't know if the prophet was talking about this, right? So whatever.
It sounds very familiar today as well. Who is it that's trying to stand up against the oppressors? And anyway, yeah, you can see it in a lot of things today as well. And even the it's like a non-theistic religion. But that's a totally different conversation to go down.
Yeah, we can get into that, because I think we are facing non-theistic religions today in 2020. Because I don't think you can take the religious impulse out of the human condition. I personally believe that religion is programmed into us on a biological level, and if you take out traditional religion, you're just going to replace it with new manufactured paradigms and new high priests and new sources of information that cannot be questioned, that create a paradigm. And if you question the paradigm, you're a heretic. We're seeing that today by people who say there's no God, and they're defining a lot of the world based on paradigms they've invented.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know how much you've looked into critical theory, critical race theory.
That's a big thing in Hollywood right now. We got to deal with that today.
Man, I mean, it's written to just confuse everyone that even attempts to look into it. It just circles.
It's all obfuscation, because there's nothing there. I mean, I've often said critical theory is the theory that nothing is true except critical theory, right? I mean, it's this complete circle which deconstructs everything except itself.
Which is like postmodernism before it, right? Yeah. Right. But the difference with critical race theory is that they have like two objective truths, which is, racism is everywhere.
Yes.
And it always will be, and you can't do anything about it, but we should try and do it our way. And it's just flipping that meta narrative to what they want, and so that they can grab that power, because like Kant, would talk about with power, you decide what can be known and what is to be known. So,
well, you hit the pivotal issue that I've had a lot of conversations with my colleagues in Hollywood about, which is, everyone's talking about, epidemiology, right? Is the big thing that we all got. Like, it's actually epistemology we have to look at, which is the search for how do we know what is true, right? And I would suggest that 2020 has revealed that many people who think they understand the truth are not actually looking at the sources of their truth, and and if they bother to look into it, begin to realize maybe this isn't as solid a foundation of a source for truth as I thought. And that's, I think, where humanity is going to be struggling for the next several years, as we face the official narratives we've been given, and our direct experience of those narratives aren't true.
Yeah, and it just feels like we're repeating ourselves over and over again. Like, even with the show, you see a lot of those same things with the Cell in episode 4. Tommy, who is the white what was that dude's name? Was he based on Jihadist Joe? Was that his name?
Which Tommy or I'm sorry,
Tommy? No, Tommy.
Well, Tommy's another character who, again, we were criticized for. It's a white blonde American kid who becomes one of these radical Islamist terrorists. And in many ways he's inspired by there was that gentleman that had been captured, one of the American Taliban, right? Who was had gone to fight for the Taliban, had been captured, and and then he was brought back, and like, what do you do with him? Because he's actually an American citizen. He's not an unlawful a combatant where they're pushing to Guantanamo. And so yeah, I mean, again, it was a character, young, idealistic, sort of hippie guy who gets involved with these cast of characters.
Yeah, I thought when the way he responded in the mosque, where he just gets up and storms out rather than even trying to engage, unlike what Christian engaged. I thought that really just showed you a lot about who he was, like what his character was all about. And yeah, again, your episode was great. The first season I thought was just fantastic. The second season, it was good.
He was good, and I think many people have said it's not as strong as the first one, and it also ended on a downer. At the end, looks like the first bad guys are defeated. Right, second season, it looks like the bad guys have won, and our hero may or may not be dead. We don't know. And then we were planning a third season, so that was supposed to be the Empire Strikes Back season, right? And we never got that because Showtime said, okay, we got 2 seasons out of you, that's all we needed, and good luck. And so that's how Hollywood works, right? And so we never got to tell the whole story that we wanted to tell. There's lots of reasons why I think the second season took a different story path. Not all of them I can really talk about in public. A lot of stuff happening internally with Showtime that's probably best left to internal politics, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, cool. I'll tell you what my biggest not problem with it, but was like the supporting cast wasn't nearly as strong as what it was in the first season.
Well, we had a remarkable cast the first season, and look, I love all the actors in the second season. It was just, I won't blame the actors for it. I think the storylines, had been critiqued, and I certainly think the storylines were not as critiqued in the first season.
Right. Yeah. It definitely felt like you were under constraint more on the second season, and
I think that's fair to say. Yeah.
And for whatever reason, it just felt like y'all went really hard in the Cinemax After Dark in the second season.
Again, those are directives that are being determined by large groups of people, and so that the challenge is, on a live stream like this, I can't always talk about some of the private discussions we had, but the critiques have been heard. And you're not the first one to say those things. And there were certainly conscious choices about storytelling, which not everyone appreciated in the second season as much as they did the first. But I will say we had some great actors, people like Tekla Royton in the second season who played a female terrorist, right? She was, again, based on real life characters, a woman who his husband had been killed in Iraq, and she was from like Belgium, and then she went to Iraq and blew herself up, right? So again, all those characters were, again, based on real people. And so that's what we took pride in, is that we're actually showing you what this world is, and it isn't what you think it is, and so that's what we explored.
So after that show, like after the second season was done, like what did that do for you in the industry? Did it lift you up? Did it give you more opportunities? Or
it's interesting because my ego was, I got a lot of attention on that show. The LA Times did a full page article just on me as this up and coming writer, which I have framed in my house. I was like, wow. And got all these, going to the Emmys and all that stuff was really great. And and it actually and I expected afterwards that the show got so much attention, and certainly you could see other shows like 24 started adjusting afterwards. The Muslim villain was no longer the standard trope after our show came on shows like 24. By the end of Jack Bauer's run, he had the Muslim imam that was helping him fight the terrorists, right? Essentially what we were doing, right?
Right.
He had that, right? So it evolved. It actually had that impact. But then something major political happened in Hollywood that changed the direction and took the story backwards. And that political event was actually Barack Obama being elected. And the amazing thing is that during the Bush administration, Hollywood, being largely opposed to Bush and the war on terror and everything else, was willing to entertain things like Sleeper Cell and more sophisticated representations of Islam in the Middle East. And you were in Iraq, and I'm sure you saw directly not everything Americans thought was happening there was what was happening there, right? I'm sure you saw it with your own eyes. And so when Barack Obama was elected, I noticed immediately there was a shift to go back to the standard Muslim villain, terrorist, unsophisticated storytelling. It was very intentional. And I'm going to state some political opinions here, which some of your viewers may or may not like, but I'll just state them. My opinion is that many people in Hollywood are sort of what we would call fake liberals, right? They say all the right liberal stuff, but especially when it comes to the Middle East, they actually have some pretty conservative viewpoints. And they don't. And there's a lot of anti-Muslim feeling in Hollywood. There's some very real bigotry that's not actually in mainstream in America. Even after the September 11th attacks, even after that's happened, the average American isn't as bigoted towards Muslims as I've experienced in Hollywood by people that talk about how liberal they are. And so once they had their sort of liberal president, the handsome, charismatic, well-spoken black man as the president, then suddenly Hollywood felt it no longer needed to go along that, we love Muslims stuff that it was trying to do during Bush, when it needed to use people like myself as a sword against the Bush administration and its policies, right? Now, like, well, we got our guy now. So let's go back to telling the stories we want to tell, which were largely Muslim villains. Right? And so then you saw, and this is what people, you could say before, like when I was a kid, you have the standard Muslim terrorist film. There was nobody in Hollywood that was from my background, really. And so they just weren't aware that they were making stereotypes and negative storytelling. They didn't know. But after Sleeper Cell got so much attention, like the New York Times, everybody was writing about it, and people knew who I was. I had risen to, a producer level on the show, and I was getting a lot of attention. And so people knew who I was. And then like, oh, okay, we now know that this kind of storytelling is false, offensive, inaccurate, and really pushes back our relationship with the Muslim world. We know that now, and we're going to do it now. Now we're going to do it knowingly, right? And we're going to do it on purpose because, we know we know this is wrong, and we're going to do it on purpose. And I will share with you a story that, and it sounds like crazy conspiracy stuff. I'll share with you a story. I will not name the producer, although most people can probably guess. There were several major shows that got a lot of attention that had the Muslim villains during the Obama era, right? And the executive producer of one of the shows got a lot of bad press for some of the Islamophobic elements that were presented. And so one of my friends was working with him on another project, and he was complaining, I can't handle this bad press, and our writers, they never seem to be able to counter this press properly. So my friend said, Kamran, and I know this producer quite well. We've had social time together, we've eaten lunch and all that. He said, why don't you just hire Kamran? You'll know he's there, right? And he can come in, and he got Sleeper Cell all these awards or whatever. And this showrunner, who's a very famous showrunner, said this to my friend, not realizing, of course, that it would come back to me, because he thought it would stay in the bubble of rich white people bubble, that you don't talk about this stuff outside, right?
Yeah, it's my favorite one.
I got to talk to you about this. I had this incident, and we went to lunch. He told me the story. He's like, I'm really shocked by this. That this showrunner then said to him, I'm never going to hire Kamran. He's not going to go along with our narrative. He's going to correct the narrative in ways we don't want him to correct it. He's going to be a problem in the room, right? So, and they knew that the storytelling was inaccurate. They just wanted the press to get off their back about it. And so they knew that I would be a troublemaker in the room, saying, hey, boss, that character actually wouldn't do that. Or, you're having the Sunnis and the Shias allied together when they're actually fighting each other. I'm not sure that's going to work, right? And so you saw that in Iraq, the Sunni Shia. You saw it yourself. And
I was there during the Civil War. I was there in 2006.
But you saw that at this most horrific time, right? So,
yes.
Yeah, and then you have Sunni extremist group and a Shia extremist group working together to fight the evil Satan. I was like, yeah, man, they're killing each other right now, man. I'm not sure. And I've been, I don't know if that storyline is going to work, boss. But the boss's agenda was to tell that story, right? And so he said bluntly to my friend, I'm never going to hire that guy. He's a sweet guy. I like him. He's good at it. But exactly as he's good at it, I'm not going to hire him. And of course, that kind of stuff gets back to me, because my friend's like, I talked about it, because my friend was like, I couldn't believe you would say that. Like, oh, I believe that. I always knew he thought that. I'm glad he said it out loud. There's a reason he never wanted to hire me for the show. I mean, even though I knew him, I was like, how am I not even getting an interview on the show? I just, okay, whatever. You know what?
That's crazy, because because I was in Iraq in 2006, and look, it was, I mean, they had to split the Sunni and Shia. Like, the Sunni were the Iraqi police, and they had an entirely different police organization, the national police, for the Shia, because they could not work together. It just, they did not, they just wouldn't.
Well, the tragedy is this, if anyone who knows the history of Iraq, when the Ottomans ruled the region that we call Iraq, they ruled it for 600 years, and it was actually relatively peaceful, right? It's because the Ottomans knew that there were these different competing groups that didn't identify with each other in this area. There were sort of the Sunni Kurds in the north, and then there were these Sunni Arabs in the south, and then there was this very large Shia Arab community that felt closely identified with Iran, which was the Ottomans' major competitor as an empire. And so they broke those up. They had the Kurdish area, and the Sunni Arabs are over here, and the Sunni and the Shia Arabs, and they kept those separate and administered separately to prevent any problems. And so when after World War I, when the British took that area, Gertrude Bell, who was sort of the female Lawrence of Arabia, she was sent there to get the tribes to fight against the Ottomans and all that. And then right after that was done, Winston Churchill told her, okay, this is what we're going to do. Now that we've got Iraq, we're going to create this unified country, putting all these groups together. She's like, you have Gertrude Bell's letters written in 15, 16. She goes, that's crazy. They're going to kill each other. And Winston Churchill's like, yeah, that's how we're going to control them. We're going to create.
Wow.
I was like, Gertrude Bell, the female Maria, Lawrence went along with the plan, and he went back to Britain, right? And he carved up the Middle East and went home, right? Whereas Gertrude Bell was so ashamed of what she had done, she stayed in Iraq. She died in Baghdad. She committed suicide. She was so horrified by what she had done, had created she drew the borders of modern Iraq, set these people up to kill each other, and then she committed suicide. She's buried in Baghdad.
And I was in West Rashid, Baghdad. Like I was in Baghdad.
That's how the world was set up. You're talking about, and so when you have, in the same way that Winston Churchill knew that these groups would fight each other, and it was in the interest of the British Empire that they do, so they're not a threat to Britain and can be controlled. In that same way, Hollywood producers like, it's in my interest to tell this story of these two groups fighting each other and make sure Cameron doesn't get in here to mess up my mojo and correct my storytelling, because it's my political interest. And I'm going to get deeper into the politics of it, which is that there are two reasons that I would suggest there's very widespread Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry in liberal Hollywood. Two very specific reasons. One is that Islam is seen as a very conservative religion. It is seen as, sexist, homophobic, whatever, right? Not woke. I would, as a Muslim, argue that it is not those things, but nonetheless, that is how it is perceived, right? So Hollywood, which sees itself as liberal and progressive, sees it as a stubborn religion that won't go with the times and, isn't getting woke with it. And so that's a problem. And the other problem is, and this is the deeper emotional issue, is that most people in Hollywood have a very deep emotional commitment to Israel, right? Even if they're very liberal, it's an emotional commitment to this state, and they feel that positive representations of Muslims and Arabs will change Americans' attitudes. Right now, most Americans are largely more sympathetic to Israel than to Palestine. I would think that's still probably true. And largely that has been how the media has portrayed it for 60 years, right? The conflict. And so they're not interested in positive portrayals of Muslims. And one of the reasons that this sort of the Sunni Shia storylines were coming in is because, Hezbollah is a threat to Israel, but right now it isn't much of a threat to America. Back in the early 80s, Hezbollah attacked the American barracks, right, in Beirut, right? Yeah. But since then, it's essentially, we leave them alone, they leave us alone, right? And their primary target is Israel. And so this showrunner, who's very emotional, I know for a fact, is very emotionally connected to Israel, wanted Hezbollah to be the villain of the show. And Americans don't care about that. So he had to link Hezbollah to Al-Qaeda, which Americans do care about. Right? And so two groups that in Syria today are killing each other had to become buddy-buddy on the TV show, right? Because that way the audience will go, Hezbollah is bad. We Americans got to go against Hezbollah, because that has nothing to do with anything except his personal emotional connection to the politics of the region.
Right.
That's the reality of it.
That's great. So I got to tell you this story. I was in Iraq, and we went to go help guard this meeting between one of our higher ups, higher ups, and some of the top leadership in Baghdad, right? And I was sitting in on the meeting. I was eating they had good food for once, and I never ate anything but the bread out on the streets. All I ever ate was the bread, the round one that if you don't eat it,
quite good. So I guess Iraq, when it's been bombed to smithereens, isn't that good. I've had Iraqi food; it's quite good.
yeah. This one dude, man, that we accidentally took some wires down when we were rolling through the Ramallah, and they brought out this giant bowl of, I guess, chili. And I didn't touch it, but one dude just ate it up. I'm like, dude, are you sure? I didn't see him for 3 days. He was just
in the toilet.
Yeah.
Golden toilets.
So anyway, I'm in on this meeting, and thanks for coming, Denlon. I was in on this meeting, and I remember the guy was talking about how the dude was like, look, the Iraqi guy was like, no, just give us back our country, and we'll take care of this Sunni problem, right? We'll take care of it. No Sunni, no problem. And our dude, I think he was a colonel. He was like, you're talking about genocide. And the guy goes, no, not the Jews, the Sunni. I don't even think we have Jews. And
they did. There used to be a lot of Iraqi Jews. Most of them are in Israel now, and they had a great culture. So yeah,
I laughed my ass off. I had to leave the room because when he heard genocide, he immediately thought of the Jews.
Sure,
And
sure. And
it was,
you thought that was, yeah.
it was so good.
The tragedy of all of this, and I'll say this as a Muslim, the current conflicts, and there's some really violent conflicts between Sunni and Shia sects of Islam today, right? And you saw them with your own eyes.
Yeah.
And again, a more modern phenomenon. My great grandmother was Shia. I'm Sunni, right? She married a Sunni man, and intermarriages between the two communities were very normal well into the 20th century, and it was modern sort of nationalist politics that has driven them apart. Modern nationalist politics around Iran. This is what's happening today is the Middle East with the Israeli peace deals with the Gulf states. Israel doesn't care about those Gulf states. It's using them as a bulwark against Iran and vice versa, right? So it's all about those issues. But it's tragic for me because this is the world that this generation sees of the Muslim world isn't the historical Muslim world. It's like taking the era of when Italy is collapsing, right? And all the nation states are fighting it and saying that's all of Roman culture, right? It's not. I mean, you're taking this moment when the civilization is going through a transformative period and people are at each other's throats and saying that that's the actual culture when it actually is not. It's just this liminal moment in history.
Yeah. Yeah. There was only one time I found we had a Sunni and a Shiite like together at the same time. It was late at night. We're rolling. They were out past curfew. Then they ran from us. One guy, he jumped over a wall like a Super Mario. He bounced on the tire, grabbed barbed wire, and jumped over it. It was crazy. While being shot at, it was insane. But two guys were left. One was Sunni and the other one was Shiite. We were confused as shit, like why they were together. And Iraqi police came.
Yeah. Okay.
And the one dude is just in tears, just crying. And as soon as Iraqi police get there, they get smacked the shit out of him, just start to smack him. The other guy, calm, quiet, didn't say a word. And the Iraqi police started coming up to him. I'm like, oh man, like, what are you gonna do with this guy? This guy's a real hard ass. He's like, no. He's Sunni. He's good. He's not bad. He's good. So I shit you not, they took the guys, and about a block down the road where we could still see them, they let the Sunni dude just out of their vehicle and just run. Okay. 2 days later, found the other guy in a ditch.
Oh,
with the same zip ties that we had him on. I had him in.
You know what happened? Yeah.
Yeah. It was crazy. We would sit there and there'd be just groups of each faction like across the street from each other, and they would just 6, 7 of them would come from one side to the other side and just gun battle, and then like 4 of them would make it back, and then they would go over there, and we'd just sit there and watch. There was time.
It's a tragedy, and the sad thing is this, and again, these are and you were there, so you may or may not agree with this, and I'm just gonna say my opinion. The sad thing is, I think someone like a Saddam Hussein was necessary to keep that country together. That's sort of what the 100%. British set up. We needed and the moment you have our Western style democracy, they'll be like, okay, it's time for genocide, man. Let's vote for genocide. Right? I mean, that's
right. Well, because there's a majority.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a majority. That's why democracy, like even in our country, people want to say it's not. It's a constitutional republic, and it's for good reason. The Electoral College is there for a very good reason, because the majority is not always right. And I don't know why that's not more apparent.
I mean, our founders knew that. Our founders knew that the danger of unbridled democracy is mob rule, which is what I think a lot of people in this world currently want. And so the founders considered Greek democracy. They studied it, and then they studied Roman Republic theories, and they studied Plato, and they studied Aristotle, and they looked at history and goes, okay, we're going to do it this way. We're going to set up all checks and balances on every level to prevent mob rule. And I think we'll see how the remainder of this election process plays out. I think many of the surprises that may still come are because the checks and balances that the founders put in, and I think a lot of people will be startled by as the time progresses closer to the Electoral College vote. So,
I think that you mentioned last time we spoke that you also wrote historical books on
Salahuddin. Yes. Actually, hold on a second. I'm gonna bring. I'll show you. I'll show.
Yep. By the way, thanks for everybody this year.
Yeah, everybody. So here are 2 of my novels. This is My second novel, which actually was the first one that I wrote, Shadow of the Swords, which is a historical novel about Saladin, the great Muslim king who fought Richard the Lionheart and in the Crusades, the Third Crusade. So it's a novel about the Third Crusades. And, there have been a lot of novels, as you can imagine, about Richard the Lionheart, a lot of movies about him. And there's never really been one done from the Muslim perspective. And so this is sort of the tale from Saladin's point of view, right? And I wrote it after September 11th because I actually wrote it originally as a screenplay right after September 11th because the interesting thing of that story is that it's 1,000 years ago. It's a lot 1100s AD, and the world as we know it is flipped. The Muslims are the world's dominant civilization. They're the world's big scientific advanced culture. Yeah. And at the time, the Europeans are frankly illiterate, smelly barbarians who are coming in and they're just killing women and children left and right, and they're the terrorists, right? And Richard the Lionheart, that we think of as a heroic guy, in his own time, he was a brutal guy by his own people's standards. His soldiers hated him. After the crusade was over, when they got back to Europe, the soldiers basically arrested him and left him in jail in Germany and took off, right? And said, we're done with this clown. We're done with this autocrat, right? And I mean, that's Richard the Lionheart. And so I was like, well, that's not the story we've ever been told, and so I wanted to show what... if we flip September 11th around, where suddenly you have the Muslims of the world's dominant civilization, you have radical, dangerous fanatics killing women and children left and right and doing it in the name of their God, and Jews and Muslims are allied against this evil force of fanatical European terrorists, right? That's not a story that we imagine today, but it's essentially a flipping of the story of where we are today in the 21st century. So that novel was published through Simon & Schuster. I have a second novel, which was actually my first published. It's called Mother of the Believers, and it's a historical novel about the birth of Islam from the point of view of Muhammad's wife, Aisha. So, it's basically told from her point of view, as a woman's point of view, on the birth of this religion. And she lived long past the prophet passed away. And so she saw how it grew from this small persecuted group to literally, controlling half the planet in her lifetime, right? And so, she was very heavily involved in the very first Muslim civil wars that happened, that created the Sunni Shia conflict, right? So I got that story from her point of view. So yeah.
So I've studied broad strokes because I am an ordained minister. I'm a universalist.
In which tradition do you worship?
Christianity, but universalist. Definitely lean universalist because the traditionalism and conditionalism, both of them, just really bothered me with the idea of hell in general, of just the punishment not really fitting the crime whatsoever in any case, but that's a whole different thing. But
I'm a religion major. I'm fascinated by religion. So at some point, we should talk about how you got to the universalist community, because I've studied them and I have a lot of respect for them.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I was raised Southern Baptist, so it is quite
a bit of a journey.
Yeah. But so what was it?
Oh, we were talking about you were an ordained minister, and so we're talking about, I guess, maybe your own spiritual journey. So yeah.
Well, no. So when I studied the Third Crusade specifically, because I was going to bring this up, was that they were also Saladin. I'm really bad at this.
We call him Saladin. Saladin.
Right.
That's how it's pronounced by the Europeans.
So when he fought King Richard, right? They fought multiple times, and then eventually, I guess King Richard started to respect him, and there was a respect that grew between them, through their battles, and I always found that interesting.
Well, that's the interesting about that crusade, is that it ended in a truce. There was no victory. The end result was neither side won. Saladin was trying to get all these guys out, right? And the Crusaders were trying to take Jerusalem and get all the Muslims out. The end result was the Crusaders ended up controlling the coast. And Saladin controlled Jerusalem and the eastern parts of what was then Palestine. And so he, and that's the novel ends with the truce between the two men, right? And how they came to understand each other. And one of the reasons that the crusade was not successful, according to the accounts really that we have of the Crusaders' own historians, was they were so disarmed by Saladin's chivalry and generosity and the fact that the Muslims weren't barbarians. They had been told this. These guys are coming in from little villages in England and France and Germany and showing up halfway across the planet expecting to find that Jerusalem was controlled by the devil and it was just this evil place of suffering and barbarism. And it's like this grand civilization where they have technology and refrigeration and things that no one's ever heard of, right? And that these people are actually gracious in war and won't kill women and children. And and when Richard the Lionheart got struck with malaria, Saladin sent his personal doctor in the middle of the battle to heal the guy. And so these kinds of gestures so startled the Crusader warriors that it took away their ability to fight. They didn't want to continue. They're like, what are we doing here? You told us a story. These people were our enemies. And Saladin's acting like a better Christian than you are. Richard was one of the reasons they turned against Richard. They began to see Richard as a really despicable person compared to what they were now witnessing Saladin doing. Richard's killing women and children, no problem. And they started going, this isn't what Christ wants. And this guy, this evil infidel, is like treating us graciously. So that kind of human connection is how, in many ways, conflict is overcome, is when we see each other as human beings.
Right. What did you think of Kingdom of Heaven? It's on course here, but like Kingdom of Heaven by
Ridley Scott.
Ridley Scott. Yeah. How did you think that he did?
Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you, please.
Oh, how do you think he did with the way that he portrayed everyone, all the sides?
Well, it's interesting because his movie was the reason my movie never got made. I wrote my Crusade movie, and then I'd actually got a lot of attention. So several major producers were interested in making it at the time. And then, Ridley Scott announced he's doing Crusades movie. So I'm a nobody at the time.
Right.
Nobody, but certainly I was 20 years ago. And so they're like, you're not going to be able to compete with Ridley Scott. And he made his movie, and his movie turned out to be a prequel to my story, which then I had novelized, right? His movie is about the pre-story between Saladin and Richard. It's about the Christian kingdom of Jerusalem, which is the remnant of the first crusade that controlled Jerusalem for almost 90 years, right? And then the movie is about how Saladin eventually defeats the Christian king and conquers Jerusalem. And then the final scene of that movie is the beginning of mine, which is Richard going to say, well, I'm going to take it back, right? And that's my story, right? And so that's the final tale. But I mean, I thought it was a wonderful movie. It's probably the best movie in the Crusades done from a European point of view, because it especially showed Saladin for what he was. It showed him that this guy isn't the bad guy in the story, right? The thing is this, the theatrical version was cut down by an hour. The original director's cut version, which is available on DVD,
so much better.
Yeah, it's 3 hours, and there's a lot more Saladin in it, and he really becomes the main character in that. And they had a wonderful actor playing it. But one of the things that even in the limited theatrical version, where Saladin is sort of this figure they're all afraid of and shows up a couple of times, even there, when he conquers Jerusalem, which is what he historically did, he lets them go, right? And he preserves the Christian churches, which startled them. They didn't expect. That's part of his thing. Is like, we're not here to destroy you. You guys are the barbarians. You killed all the people when you came here. We're going to treat Christians and Muslims and Jews with respect. And even that was shown in the movie, which is what Saladin did. And so it's a great movie. I hope one day my movie, based on my now novel, gets made someday, because in many ways it's the precursor to the real story. When
you're talking about your book, it really reminded me of some of the same things we saw in Kingdom of Heaven. Listen, I see y'all in the chat. I didn't ask him about his experiences in the Crusade.
He's asking about my perspective on the Crusades.
I have the worst friends on YouTube. I wanted to bring this up way earlier, but when we were talking about that switch in Hollywood from the Bush era to the Obama era,
and then the Trump era. Again.
One of the things that's really bothered me was the way they started depicting soldiers in the conflict. Don't lie to them. But the one move that really bothered me was in the Valley of Hela with Tommy Lee Jones, and it was based on a true story. And the whole story comes down to the soldiers get back from Iraq, and one of them, Tommy Lee Jones's son, gets killed by the other ones because they had the knife. And that's all it comes down to. And it ends with Tommy Lee Jones at a flagpole, and he puts the flag upside down, because the country's in distress. And I'm like, fuck you, man. It bothered me so much.
Youth soldiers is propaganda at Hollywood. You know that. I mean, that's this whole industry is propaganda. And because I get to be in this unique position where they, on one level, sort of, patronize me as a minority and, someone that they can use for identity politics. Look, here's my Muslim friend. I'm not a racist, right? They got that. And then I get to see their true faces, right? Which is that they tend to actually be the opposite of what they're portraying to the world philosophically, and the fact that I will call them out on it has caused me to lose friends and has caused me to make some pretty big enemies in this town. The fact that I still have a career is pretty amazing, considering how outspoken I am about Hollywood hypocrisy. I have no patience for it.
Oh yeah, no, I follow you on Twitter. I'm shocked you can do anything in Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, look, at this point, the industry thinks they've sort of put me in the box that they're going to put me in, so it doesn't really matter. I'm sort of the crazy guy over there on the side. But let's just say I've got, as you know, as a warrior yourself, the art of war, I've got a few things brewing that will hopefully take me out of the little box that they tried to put me into, and then they'll have to deal with me, which is going to be a problem. If I get a few of these things going that I'm working on, then you're suddenly at a very different level of the game, and then they have to address the fact that you're not going along with the narrative.
Yeah, for sure. Nothing you can talk about, I'm guessing.
Well, I can tell you the projects I'm working on, right? I mean, I'm happy to talk about.
Please.
Yeah, no, I've got two, I've got a few, but I've got a couple of major projects right now. They're both historical epics, and they are with major producers who have been nominated for multiple Oscars. So I'm very proud to be working with these people, and who've had very successful both movies and television shows. And so they are, one of them is a drama set in the Ottoman Empire, set in the essentially 1500s. It's a true story of the first queen of the Ottomans, who was actually a Ukrainian slave girl who was captured. She was a village girl, captured and sold to the harem of the Ottoman Sultan of Suleiman. And it's the story of how she essentially survived the harem and outsmarted 300 other women to basically be freed by the Sultan. He falls in love with her and makes her the queen, and then she gets revenge on everybody that messed with her. And it's really about the politics of the Ottoman Empire, which were largely ruled through the harem. People don't realize it was the harem. The women of the harem were essentially like the parliament, and because the Ottomans had all these women that were the harem girls from all the conquered areas of Europe, Poland, Eastern Europe, all these places, Hungary, Ukraine, Russia, all these areas. And the women that represented each of those countries that were in the harem would be trying to push for their country to be the predominant political force in the web, right? And so you'd have all these intrigues of these women who are trying to get the Sultan's attention while trying to get him to, get Hungary to fight off Romania, kind of thing, right? And so it's a fascinating story from a woman's point of view.
Oh yeah, so that definitely should get you going because it's a woman-centric. Yeah, okay, I see what you're doing. And
it's a chance again. Here now I get to talk about Islam and about history and about all these issues, but in a way that Hollywood can hopefully swallow right now, because while they may not like Muslims, they don't. A female queen to slave to queen story
takes revenge.
It takes revenge, and part of it you can talk about human trafficking, because that is what essentially that was. I mean, these people are being captured and sold, right?
Yeah.
Slaves, right? And so, you can talk about those issues that Hollywood at least pretends to care about, right? And so, and then I will talk about those issues, and then I'll also talk about these broader political issues that I care about. So that's one. And I have a second project that I'm developing as well, which we are actually hoping to actually develop it in Spanish language for Spain. But it is a pilot I've written set in the last years of the Moors. So the 1480s. It's the war between Ferdinand and Isabella versus the last Moorish Sultan of Granada. So, and how that war essentially led to the unification of Spain under the Catholic rule, the expulsion of the Muslims, and Christopher Columbus's journey, right? So that's the tale of our modern world was set up in that conflict.
I mean, are they're cool with this though? Because I know I know a little bit of this time that you're talking about in both cases, but for the most part, I'm like, oh, these are words I've never heard. These are things I don't know at all. I feel like that has to be a fight to get them to do something that's so little, so few Americans know anything about.
I mean, but the thing is, that the only reason they don't know about it is that they're not trying to tell those stories. Story. I wrote the Spanish project. I actually wrote several years ago. It's called Andalus, which was the name of the Muslim kingdom of Spain, right? Andalus, right? It used to be all of Spain was under Andalus, and by this time period, it's only the coast, right? That's all that's left. And so that story I wrote it at the time because people were like, Game of Thrones was hot and hip, and everyone's like, man, and everyone on TV was trying to get the Latino, market's interest. And I was like, well, here's the ultimate Latino Game of Thrones, right? Here you've got this story of the Spanish king versus the Muslim king. And at this time, we think of the Moors as the Moors weren't a different race. The Moors were essentially Spaniards who were Muslim. 800 years living next to these people. They've all intermingled. It's one ethnicity, right? The idea is these were Africans who were a separate ethnicity. By 800 years into it, they ain't. There's all melded into modern Spain, and so here's the Latino Game of Thrones of all these different kingdoms fighting, and from that, the modern world, the Western world, is created from that conflict. I was like, that's a story that Hollywood would normally tell if it didn't have a political agenda about the underlying topic, right? so I've had to overcome that. I had a major Oscar-winning director who I've wanted to work with my entire life, fell in love with the script of that project, wanted to come on board. His agents convinced him to leave the project because they just felt he shouldn't be doing something with Muslim characters. It wasn't going to help him in Hollywood, right? And so I lost this incredible someone who and someone who I've been dying to work with my entire life was going to direct the pilot of my show, and he walked away under pressure. And so
I'm trying to guess it in my head.
I'll let you guess. There's a few. And it broke my heart. And then we decided, okay, if it's not going to work in Hollywood, by now, like, Spain has become the Spanish language is the second largest thing on Netflix, right? Americans watch Spanish language shows on Netflix, and during this whole lockdown crap, people were just watching Spanish dramas, with subtitles. That's their most lucrative thing on Netflix right now. And so I was like, well, why don't we develop this in Spain? And now we have a major award-winning Spanish director who we're partnering with, and so hopefully we'll be able to take it out with him and hopefully sell it to a Netflix Spain or something of that nature. And then if we do a Spanish language version of it with an A-list director, it's a pretty good outcome.
There was that HBO show. It's not Spain. It's Italy. The new Pope, the young Pope.
Yeah, the young Pope.
Yeah. I'm not a.
I know what you're. But yes.
I'm not a subtitle guy. Like, if I wanted to read, I'd open a book. Like, don't do this to me. And for the most part, but I thought that was this Italian show about, like, it brought me in, even though, like, a lot of it is in Italian. And so it definitely can work, like, for even dum-dums like me here in America. It just has to be right.
And I think this story, I'm very proud of the pilot. Everyone who's read the pilot, the pilot gets me, like, work. Like, even as you as a writing sample, people are like, oh, you're incredible. Hey, when you want to write this movie for us? And so, the story itself is so incredible, and it's so unexpected. And again, this is a chance to tell the thing that I want to talk about, which is, at this time, the Moors were the dominant culture of Spain, and and Ferdinand and Isabella were representing the Inquisition, right? They're representing this destruction of knowledge and this corruption of religion, because I don't think the Inquisition represents the values of Christianity or Catholicism specifically, but that's what it was being presented at the time. And so the story is told, again, from the point of view of two historical generals that were real. One is Rodrigo Ponce de Leon. His nephew became the famous Ponce de Leon, who was the explorer, who's actually a teenager in the show. Before he becomes the explorer, he's a character. So Rodrigo Ponce de Leon was the commander of the Spaniard forces, and his counterpart amongst the Moors was a guy named Musa ben Abel, who was the Moorish general, the Muslim general. And historically, they had to fight this war. They had to basically, it's all about the political machinations, like Game of Thrones, as they're trying to outsmart each other. And then they ended up historically becoming very close friends. And they both tried to stop the extremists in their own country, on both sides, who were trying to make this war get worse. And in the end, they were not able to, and the war leads to this final conflict. And
they're not going to.
Yeah, and one of them had to kill the other historically, and I won't reveal which one did. But and that's the tragedy of it. They became very close friends, and then they had to choose which side they were on when it all blew up. And one of them had to kill the other in the final battle. And so
they are not going to let you do that.
Yeah. So, but that's a story I think anyone's going to watch. It's two enemies who become friends, who then have to become enemies again.
Yeah, they're not going to let you do that. No,
God willing, they will. God willing, they will. Don't say no. I already got everyone to say no. I don't need you to say no.
No, sorry. I just meant, like, it's too.
I'll say yes.
It's too good, and it's too relevant.
Well, they were certainly they thought it so far, right? And I'm just hoping to get through the woke fakeness of, like, well, this is a story about these oppressed brown people versus the evil Spaniards. I could maybe sell it that way. That's not the story I want to tell, because again, one of the heroes is a devout Catholic. So this isn't about good Muslims versus bad Catholics. That's not the story.
I think you'd have a better chance if you did that. Maybe throw in like a Southern Baptist evangelical, just randomly.
Well, it's interesting. If you 19th century literature, it's fascinating. If you read some of the great literatures like Mark Twain traveled the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
right? He had a lot of respect for Islam. George Bernard Shaw did. He, back in the 1800s, was writing very respectfully of Muslims, and he wrote this great thing about Muhammad, where he said Muhammad is this great man that Christians don't understand, should respect him. This is the 1800s. It's interesting. Americans have this long, long heritage of the Muslim world that we've forgotten. I mean, the very first country that recognized the independent United States was Morocco. I mean, the Kingdom of Morocco. No one else. Europe was like, I don't know. You're in France, like, I don't know about this, man. You colonies declaring independence. The King of Morocco said, yeah, we're in. And so the Kingdom of Morocco was the first one to sign a treaty with the colonies and said we recognize the United States of America. And so we've had a long, long history with the Muslim world, and it's just the way it's presented now. It feels like this is a recent adversarial relationship. It isn't.
What was the guy? I'm pretty sure he was American. He may have been English, but I'm pretty sure he's American. He goes to like Afghanistan and he gets involved with the whole trying to make like metal into gold or whatever. And then
Like
he hooks up with, yes, like an alchemy thing. Yeah. And I had to look up that story. It's such a great story though, but like
there's the book, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, which is, a fictional tale of someone traveling from Spain to Egypt to follow his dreams. But I don't think that's what you're talking about.
No, I know that one too. Yeah. Because like that's when, before I met my girlfriend and I was online, like that was one of the books, like chicks would be like, oh, he seems deep. So, you just throw that one in.
Yeah, well, it's a good book. I mean, that book actually is what put me on the path that I'm on today. I was a lawyer before, and I read that book, and it's all about following your personal dreams, what it calls your personal legend, and that book gave me the courage to leave the law and go become a full-time artist, which is what I've been doing now for 20 years. So I got to thank Paulo Coelho for that.
I never read it. I'm sure it's good.
It's a good.
So just trying to wrap it back up to Sleeper Cell real quick. What's that?
Yeah, please bring it back to Sleeper Cell, sure.
Yeah. Bring it back to that because I had so many notes and sorry. My girlfriend wanted me to bring up the chokehold in season 2.
Yeah, she was disturbed by that scene. Huh?
No, actually no. She was just mad that the technique like that wouldn't have, like he would have had to hold it longer for her to die. It was a really technical.
Is she MMA trained? Is she like a jiu-jitsu trained?
No, but I was a combative instructor when I was in the Army. Okay. And so she picks up on a lot of this from me. So she's like, that's not how it works. I'm like, it's a show.
It's real. He's going to kill the actress. So we can't have him actually make it to
Yeah.
We have stunt there who adjust it so it actually doesn't injure the person. So they can't make it as real. Yeah.
She was just mad about that.
It's based on, for those in the second season, one of the most emotional moments of the show. We had a character who was a brilliant actor who played this Bosnian character who's sort of this, the most sympathetic of the terrorists. He's this guy whose whole family had been slaughtered in Bosnia during the Bosnian-Serbian wars, right? And he was really psychologically damaged from the massacre, and he got involved with these people. And so all of his actions are coming from this really deep pain and pathology. And he survived at the end of first season. He's one of the terrorists who survived and actually was on the run, right? He escaped. And in the second season, we follow his journey as he tries to put all this behind him, right? And he ends up meeting a girl and falling in love with her, and and they have a normal life. And then he's found by his terrorist friends and pulled back in. And essentially they tell him, you got to kill her because she knows who you are, and we've got a mission for you. And this is and he ended up killing her, and it's the most devastating thing for his character because you keep wondering if he's going to return to the light path or not, right?
Yeah.
That scene, I think, broke a lot of people because they fell in love with that character and they really hoped that he was salvageable, and we didn't let him be salvageable.
But my girlfriend was still like them. She was still on board with him. I'm like, really? Like, she's like, yeah, I'm still on board. I'm still on board.
Dude, I don't know. It is what it is, man. You learned that thing. You learned that thing, man.
For sure. So, but by the way, in the third season, like he was going to have to choose between which way he was going to go, right? Because like I felt like he was still kind of up in the air.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of it, is that he's the most complex character of all of them. He's the most damaged. He's not coming there because of like, I have issues with my daddy. He's coming there because his whole family was massacred because they were Muslim, and he blames the West for what happened, right? That nobody saved them. So that you can at least understand the pathology behind him, right? And so that's why, because he's not a person that grew up hating America. In fact, the character loves rap music and all that. Yeah. So that's why he's torn by this, is that, this, and it was the same thing with the female character second season, is that she wasn't anti-American. She's just, you killed my husband and I'm going to get revenge, right? And so we tried to, you know, people say you're trying to humanize. We're not humanizing. We're showing these people as they are, you know,
because they are human.
They're human and they've gone down a wrong moral path, right? And we want to show how they got there and whether some of them can be redeemed. Because like you said, the episode I did about the scholar, the real scholar that it's based on, that gentleman has deprogrammed hundreds of Al-Qaeda extremists who are in prisons. And you know, the number 2 of Al-Qaeda had been captured in Yemen, and he was deprogrammed by this imam. And basically realized, oh my God, I've been in a cult this whole time. I'm on the wrong side. And he gave up his boss. And the Americans dropped a bomb on the guy's hideout and killed his boss, the number 1 of Al-Qaeda, because the number 2 gave him up. Yeah, and that's what it is. You know, as we do. And like I have less of a problem with attacking actual terrorists than, you know, what was going on during Obama, which was mostly just dropping drones on entire villages, and maybe you got your guy, maybe you didn't get your guy. It doesn't really matter, right? I mean,
so many dronings. Yeah. I do want to. I guess was going through my notes. I do want to say something that I did enjoy about season 2. I loved season 2 with Darwin, the main character, that he was more involved. Because so the first season he felt kind of very neutral where everything was happening in around him. He didn't have a lot of impact, like whenever he was responding to stuff. And in the second season, though, because of what happens and he's put in this position in the sales, I thought was genius that he's now running it, but also it was fantastic. But like he's more assertive.
The situation we put him in is that what do you do? How do you? This guy suddenly, you know, he was supposed to be a cell member infiltrating it. Now suddenly he's put in charge of the cell when his boss is gone. And you'd think, okay, well, how are you gonna have a show about that? He's just gonna arrest everybody, you know, because he's now the boss, right? But what it is what we do. That's what we do with mafia bosses, is that he's part of a small group, and so he's gonna have to play along in order to find out how the rest of this network works and bring everybody else down, right? And I thought we certainly explored it in an interesting fashion.
Yeah. Oh. Last thing from my girlfriend, I promise. Yeah, she was also very worried in your episode, because you did episode 3 and 7 in the second season.
The second season, yes.
Right. And in the 7th episode, which would she was so worried that you were going to let Gail live because she did not like her.
The actress was wonderful, and she did a great job. She played our hero's girl love interest for 2 seasons, right? And Melissa Sage Miller, and was really wonderful actress, very generous. And then, you know, we decided, because the second season was going to be The Empire Strikes Back, where everything goes wrong. And in the second season, near the end of the season, which is episode 7, which I co-wrote with one of my colleagues, we ended up having to kill our hero's girlfriend, who we've gotten to care about over 2 seasons, and she ends up being killed by the female terrorist, whatever, that she's been befriending. And so you know, she was a great actress. I think a lot of people have crushes on Michael Ealy, our lead, and so they often resented the women that he was dating. And I don't know,
could be it, yeah.
But he's a very man. At the time, I'm sure he'll resent me saying this, but at the time he was dating Halle Berry, so I'll be like, "Hey, Michael, you want to bring your girlfriend by the set sometime?" You know, because his girlfriend is Halle Berry, right? He's like, "No, I think I'm going to keep it private." I'm like, hey, "You don't have to keep it private. You can bring your girlfriend by."
Oh, that's funny. By the way, she ended up marrying Christian.
Yes, the actress ended up marrying the actor who played Christian. Yeah.
See, I looked things up for this, but
God bless them, you know, good for them.
Yes, wish them all the best. Man, I'm gonna let you go now because I'm sure you have stuff to do other than just listening.
We didn't talk in a lot of depth, but I hope some of this was of value to your audience.
Oh, I don't care about them. This was all for me. Like the thing on my channel, like almost everything I do is for me. If people watch it and they like it, they do. I'm gonna do. But again, I appreciate everyone being there in the chat and watching the replay. But I can't thank you enough for coming on, and I would love to have you back, and we can delve more into religion outside of Hollywood as well. And
I've got a lot of interesting perspectives on that, you know, and so I'd love to hear about your journey. I can share some of my journey, and so yeah. For sure.
Do you have anything else you want to promote?
No, You guys heard about my novel. If anyone wants to check out, if anyone wants to buy my novels, they're available. Even though I may despise Amazon, it still sells my novels, and they're available on Barnes and Nobles too. But and you can go to my website, which is just my name, KamranPasha.com, KamranPasha.com, where I've got a blog that I used to write for the Huffington Post. Has a lot of interesting articles on Islam. So if you're a lot of it like, yeah, this religion really sucks. I don't know, it sounds like a terrible religion. Read my blog. You'll get some perspectives on Islam from a believer and why it doesn't suck. And also my novels are available to purchase through the site. So I hope you'll check them out.
Yeah, I really do want to check out, not the novel about the woman. I'm not interested in women, but the other one.
Solid, you'll like it. It's good. And the great my Christian friends tell me that it actually, they loved it because you would think I would make the Crusaders look like the villains. And it's actually about Crusaders coming to understand this isn't about Christ, and this isn't what our religion's about.
I'm really going to check it out. But again, thank you so much for being here. I'm trying to click on the right thing. And I guess that'll do it for here at James. I'm just going to play the video.